Talk Shoes. Recorded live.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Castle of Horror podcast, the show dedicated to horror, movies, and awesomeness. This week we're finishing up our kind of Raimi Central thing with Drag Me to Hell. So we decided to extend Evil Dead one more so we could talk about a movie that we all really kind of dig. So this is going to be pretty cool, I think. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have, so there's spoilers ahead. Once again, this will be my final hosting gig for a while. This is Tony Salvaggio. I'm a lead singer of the band Deserts of Mars, as well as the bassist. I also have co-written with Jason the manga-style book Psycom from Tokyo Pop and the graphic novel, steampunk graphic novel from Humanoids, Clockworks. We also, in Austin, have Drew Edwards, writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man from Monsterverse Comics, and it's on Comixology. Say hey.
Hello, kiddies.
Awesome. And wrapping up as well, we have Max Meehan, who's a screenwriter, filmmaker, and the owner of the independent pro wrestling company Inspire Pro. And hey Max. And we're going to be doing this as a three-person one. This is another first for us. Again, talking Drag Me to Hell, which is a 2009 American horror film co-written and directed by Sam Raimi, who also wrote it with his brother Ivan, who focuses on a loan officer, Christine Brown, who's Allison Lohman, who reluctantly, under orders from her boss, must refuse to extend the loan to a gypsy woman by the name of Mrs. Ganoush, who curses her, and terrible things happen from there on out. This is definitely a return to form, I think, for Raimi, and I think it was what a lot of people were waiting for quite some time. And but yeah, let's get first impressions, starting with Max, and then Drew, and then I'll go.
Okay, I'll start. I would say that it is. I don't know if it is an exact return to form for me. I really love this movie. I know a lot of people who've seen it who thought it kind of pulled punches, but for me, this film is very elegant. It's a more mature Raimi. You see growth in his style. That's what I think I like about it the most. But also, it is the stuff that good horror is made of. It really relies on atmosphere. It uses a lot of shadow work, and most importantly, something that I think really contributes to a great film is incredible sound design. If you saw this in theaters, you might know what I'm talking about. I don't know. I wouldn't say that the sound is quite as impactful on the home release, but in theaters, it really gets into your bones. You can really feel this film. So it's kind of a sensual delight. I also love how it is more of a cerebral horror film. A lot of it seems to have an oral fixation, and it's something that a lot of people don't even really recognize, but it's really about this former fat girl who has a big problem with eating. And they touch upon that a lot. There's a lot of reference to it. And, I think this movie is smart. I wish there were more horror films like this, and I can't say enough good about it.
Awesome. Drew?
I also really like this movie, and I think we're probably going to get a lot of that tonight. I liked it when I first saw it in the theater. I saw it by myself, which I actually think was probably the best way to watch a movie like this, because you can really, get yourself creeped out just thinking about what's going on in the movie. I also agree that this is a more mature Sam Raimi, but what's interesting about it is the mature Sam Raimi that's really part of mainstream Hollywood and the Hollywood machine, kind of also going back and riffing on his older films. I mean, this film really does feel like a cousin of Evil Dead 2. It's not the exact same thing, but it definitely feels more like that than the Evil Dead remake that we did last week. And what was funny to me is that a lot of my friends, a lot of my horror movie fan friends, hated this movie. They thought it was like, oh, it's watered down. It's oh, where was Bruce Campbell? Oh, all this pissing and moaning about it. And then when the Evil Dead remake came out, they thought that was God's gift to horror. This is way, way more like a proper Evil Dead movie than the Evil Dead remake. And I can't say that enough. This has that same sort of darkly mischievous sense of humor that those movies have. And yes, it's not the exact same kind of thing, but it certainly has the same DNA to it.
Yeah, that's actually really good. I saw this in the theater alone as well, because actually I have to see a lot of movies that way. Once you get old enough, if you don't have kids, I think, like, if I don't go see a movie, I can't scrape enough people together. Like, everybody's kind of doing their own thing. But I saw this alone, and, man, it was scary. It was really good. There's a lot to it. It feels like, to me, it still feels like it's got all the Raimi bits that I wanted a horror movie to have. That it kind of like, there had been some of that in Spider-Man, and you get this film that's, post-Spider-Man, or, and you're like, wow, yeah, more of this. And there hasn't been more of this, but I wish there was. It's genuinely terrifying to me, and I don't know what your friends are talking about watered down. That's crazy. There's some dodgy CG here and there, but as far as watered down, like, I love the EC Comics kind of feel of it in a way. Like, there's a moralistic tale, but also, like, I don't know. It just, I feel like it's just really solid, a really solid horror movie in a time when maybe there weren't as many just really solid horror movies, I think. That's, now that I've been to Fantastic Fest and stuff, I see a lot of things, but, that's not always the case as far as mainstream stuff goes. So I guess we can start into it with, to me, one thing that I really liked about the movie is you have somebody who's put in a terrible situation. It's scary because despite the fact that it has all these horror elements, like the one thing that struck me on rewatching it is you have somebody who's put in a terrible situation who has to make a choice, and they are forced to live with this choice in a really terrible way. Like if you chose to go, you leave work a little bit early and you get into a wreck, or somebody runs out in the street, all these things that can happen. And this really feels like that, because you have a woman at a bank and, her boss, she wants to get this promotion. It's really important. And she's looking at this old woman who comes in who's just horrifying as well. and she's like, well, maybe this woman's going to die. And, she is kind of cheating the system, and who knows? And then has to live with that. And that creeps me out, just despite the horror elements.
She's also very gray. That's what I like about her. She's not like 100% ivory soap, and she's not 100% bad. She's stuck in the situation, and I think that this is a great horror film because everybody who watches any horror film puts themselves in the protagonist's shoes and wonders, what would I do in that situation? And this is one of those films where the character isn't so goddamn stupid. She's in a situation where there are a lot of things that are just unavoidable, and she has to go to extremes, which make you kind of go, oh, that's terrible, but what would I do? That's one of the things I really love about this. Like we were talking about the cat sacrifice earlier. It's a horrible thing to have to endure, and it's a horrible thing to kind of picture. I also love that he doesn't just throw everything in your face. He leaves quite a bit to the imagination, but then he has moments, for instance, where she's attacked in her car, where it's just full-on punch you in the face Raimi, and Raimi's kind of like looking at you going, I still got it. And he very much does. There's a lot of really gross textures and feelings. But, yeah, I love the character, the protagonist in this, because she's forced to do a lot of things that make her maybe less sympathetic, but then you're kind of conflicted because it's like, what would I do if I were stuck in this situation?
Yeah. You make those choices every day.
Yeah.
And, that's a logical choice. She's given the choice of helping this old woman who says, hey, why are you taking my house? And in her mind, I'm sure she's thinking, well, I mean, this woman can't have long to live. She's defaulted twice. I really want this position. And, you know, the person who's up for the position is a total jerk ass anyway. Like the other guy, man, he's just so slimy and just, I want to see so many other people in this movie drugged to hell who really deserve it. But then again, that's kind of that EC Comics, like it feels like those, you know, all of those horror comics that have kind of a moralistic tale. And then once she, you know, shames the woman and gets cursed, you know, man, things just go terribly wrong, like really quickly.
You know, she's not like a cardboard cutout movie character. Like these decisions that she's making here, and you know, I'm kind of reiterating some of the stuff you guys have already said, but these are decisions that anybody who has had one of these kind of jobs, or any kind of job really, where you're sort of faced with like a decision that sucks. And what's great about it is that she isn't like this sort of, you know, ball busting. It would have been very easy for them to make her like this ball busting bitch type character, and you know, what you have is this girl that, you know, is probably outside of this situation probably pretty nice. I mean, she seems to have like a pretty good life going for herself. Her boss, you know, he does seem like he likes her. You know, he doesn't maybe think that she's like the best employee he's got, but he seems like he likes her. And her boyfriend seems like he's a pretty okay guy. You know, it's, you know, the only thing, you know, there's maybe a slight, you know, fragility to her that comes through at times, but you know, she seems like a pretty nice person. And the fact that she's put into this, and she doesn't react like a character that's normally in horror films. Like, we talk a lot about horror film logic on this show, and the way horror film characters react to things that are unrealistic and say things that are unrealistic, and you'll accept that because it's a horror film. You know, there isn't this sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, this character doesn't act like she's in a world. When this movie starts, she's not acting like she's in a world where curses exist or demons exist.
Sure.
You know, she's making perfectly rational decisions that people make every day, and that makes her all the more relatable. And then when you get into the sort of more fantastical elements, you know, it's great. And like, the old lady is like a great window into that, because she is very much like this classic horror movie gypsy that they said, like, she looks like she should be in The Wolfman.
Right. Yeah, that's a good call.
She probably did fight some werewolves or know some werewolves at one time.
What I will also say, though, that she is toward, as she becomes more desperate and she becomes more hardened, which is a great parallel between, you can kind of draw parallels between this and Evil Dead 2. There's a lot of ash in her, even from Army of Darkness, where there are circumstances where she kind of becomes bumbling, and there are, you know, even the way it ends is very much, you know, like it's a blunder, you know. She blunders quite a bit as she's just she's very desperately trying to, you know, rid herself of this curse. That's another thing I like about it. Also, you touch upon the EC Comics thing. When I was rewatching this today, and I've got pretty decent sound set up in my house. It's not an overtly gimmicky film, but there's something about this film that just has a very classic feel, a very classic vibe, a very old school like atmosphere. And the thing that I continually return to when I'm like listening to the sound design is, like I said, it's not too gimmicky, but a lot of it really reminds me of a William Castle film for some reason. It just has that.
Oh, I would totally go with that.
That good, spooky, kind of wholesome vibe, and I think it was very bold of Raimi to just kick down the door and go like, fuck y'all, I'm doing this, and he does a miraculous job of it. I'm still blown away by how many people just don't like this film or are dismissive of it. I know people that are dismissive of it because of the weird the CG moments, which are, you know, the use of shadows, which is a shame, but overall,
the shadow stuff looks great. There's some other stuff that wasn't as good. But also, you know, I forgot, like, I had written it down in my notes, and I just saw, you know, this movie starts off. There's a Hispanic family who comes and says, "Hey, my son's hearing all this stuff," and it just from there the evil just starts.
Yeah, they send a little boy to hell at the beginning of this movie, and they're saying this movie pulls punches. It doesn't have buckets of blood like the Evil Dead movies. Okay, we get that, but it's still it's still pretty damn gross.
A kid goes to hell at the beginning of the movie. Gets dragged.
They kill a kid and they kill the cat. Like that's like a thing that a lot of people won't go near. The kids stay sacred. The kids and the animals are sacred. You don't touch them. You leave them alone. But Raimi actually, in a very soft way, I think, violates convention here. But yeah, this is a film that made me kind of go, you still got it. You still got it. And
yeah.
I'm very pleased with this film. I think it deserves a lot more love than it gets. I think it's a very smart film.
When did Army of Darkness come out? Because we really think about like Raimi took a nice long break for making this kind of movie, and he comes back with such a vengeance. And you think about like other people who, people build up all this hoopla about. Like, oh, Spielberg's going to go make another Indiana Jones movie, and that's disappointing. Oh, Lucas is going to make another Star Wars movie, and that's disappointing. Oh, Romero is going to start making zombie films, and that's disappointing. So all these old idols go back to familiar territory, and it's always disappointing. Raimi goes back to his old sandbox and succeeds, but I think it's also in part because he doesn't do it exactly how he would have done it when he was 20 or 30 or, when he was making, those weird low-budget movies that started his career. He has callbacks to that, like the maniacal dancing demon the old woman at one point basically effectively becomes a Deadite. And
it's still not an Evil Dead film, though. He has this property, and it's really fresh. In a weird way, he's going so backward in terms of like style in terms of horror film. He's going back and he's making something very old school, something that could have been like British from the 60s. And
that's sort of my point. Like he it's still very much a Sam Raimi movie, and it still like feels like related to those films. But I see touches of The Haunting here. I see touches of big touches of Curse or of the Demon. There's a lot.
That's a great reference.
And from from the moment you see that old Universal logo at the beginning of the movie, you know that like Raimi's pulling out like. We've talked a lot about this on the other films, like Raimi's influences. Like you see the usual influences that you start to associate with Raimi, but you see new stuff in this, and you see. And I think that's why he succeeded where other people have failed when they're trying to sort of go back to the start of their career. Like Raimi could stop making superhero films or fantasy films and $100 million movies and just make low budget horror films, and he could probably be successful. He would, if this was a movie made by a new filmmaker and it didn't have like the range, like people's expectations, I think of like what they want from Sam Raimi. I think if this was just a brand new movie, people would still be talking about it because it's a very striking movie.
If Guillermo del Toro had did this film, people would be jerking off over it, actually. And I don't
absolutely.
like Del Toro at all. I think this movie, but I think like unlike a lot of Del Toro's work, what I like about this movie is its subtlety and its nuance and its intelligence and its refusal to beat people over the head with its very detail. And I think that is so amazing. It's one of those films that I've watched maybe 5 times now, which surprises me to even kind of like admit that. I've seen this movie many times because people will come over and go, I never saw that. Is that worth anything? And I'll go, yeah, you should see it. And they'll go, do you want to watch it? And I'll sit down. And every time I sit down with somebody and I watch it, I see something completely new or different about it. Like, for instance, the fat girl thing and the oral fixation and this really being this weird food-related horror film about this girl who's, like, really apprehensive about being what she once was, because you see her in photos and you hear her talk about her past, and virtually every visual horror element it revolves around some weird oral fixation. And that's something that it took me a long time to kind of, like, extract from it. And there are no horror films that do that nowadays. I think that's what I really don't like about the remake as well. I touched upon that last week where I said they really just beat you over the head with flashback cut-ins and shit because they think the audience is dumb. But they really try to just shock you with the body horror element of it. And here, this is not just visceral, gross horror. This is cerebral, and it's really bold. It's a ballsy movie. It really is.
They do things like, she's gotten, this woman says, hey, I'm going to make you pay. She goes out to her car. It's really creepy. We see the Sam Raimi, mobile again, and she's attacked. And the woman, but first there's that great scene with the handkerchief as it goes by. Then the woman attacks her, gums her, her jaws fly out, all this awesome stuff. And, she puts the car in reverse, she puts it in forward, she wrecks the car. And the cool thing is, you're expecting, like, well, is that a dream? Because she just wrecked a car. And then, how's she going to explain this? And they cut to, she's explaining an old woman attacked her in her car, and that's why she smashed up 2 cars plus her own. That kind of stuff where it definitely doesn't pull any punches on any of that. And
also, it also works great throughout the rest of the movie because it gives her, people don't question it when she's acting so erratic because they're like, well, she's got post-traumatic stress. Right.
And also, it shows her early on that she's, she almost in the bank. You can tell she wants to give this woman an extension. She wants to give her this loan.
Yeah.
And then circumstances are that she doesn't because she also wants this promotion for many reasons. One of them be, hey, this will get approval from my, really serious boyfriend's parents. Like all these things that you think about that are just common things that, you hope you don't get cursed for. And then, in the car fight, she's like, slamming the woman with staples, and there's like, she's tough, she is that, what you were talking about, that kind of Ash aspect to her. And, it's turned back around. And so when things go really awry, she does show how tough she is. And then, when she comes home and all of a sudden there's all this, all that shadow work and sound design, like you said, just where she's being haunted and stalked in her home by the Lamia, the black goat. I mean, man, that stuff is scary, super scary.
What I also like about it is there's no safe corner in this movie either. It's very much about the trickle-down economics of being a victim. Everybody's a victim in this movie. It's from the gypsy woman. She's very clearly a victim, she's someone who's begging for humanity and compassion. But then you've got this protagonist who just isn't in a position to grant it. It's not even her position, She's very clearly playing by the rules. She's doing her job to the T. It's not even like she's being ruthless or vindictive. She's just doing her job as she is supposed to do her job. It's according to the rules. And then I think one character that a lot of people really overlook in this movie is the boyfriend, whom I really love because, in a weird way, he reminds me of the boyfriend from Witchboard, which is a movie that I absolutely love, where you've got Tawny is in this position where she's dealing with this really, in her mind, overt psychic force that is just tormenting her. And her boyfriend doesn't believe in this shit, but he loves his girlfriend so much that he's willing to go to any lengths that he can to save or protect her. So there's that element. I think the boyfriend is a really interesting character because he's really pushing to do whatever he can to help her.
You feel a lot for him because there's this inevitability. You're rooting for it to all work out, but you kind of know it's not going to. And that this is probably the most likable Justin Long has ever been in a movie. And I have to say, I think the tragedy element really brought something out in him, and he has good chemistry with the female lead here. And I gotta agree. Like he's a great character, and his interactions with his parents when they have that dinner scene, like you believe he is their son, and that again, like I never thought about it that way, but even that scene built around food, and the food literally starts becoming monsters.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's also cool just when you think he's about to be kind of a jerk, because they keep having these like little bits where you're like, oh look, he's the typical horror movie boyfriend, doesn't believe her, stuff like that. Just when you think that, he does something that shows like, wow, he does actually care. He will support her. He's not, he's still the shade of that horror, kind of typical horror movie boyfriend, but
he's kind of
really, really like every time you think he's just gonna be kind of a jerk, they put a little bit of a spin on it, and I think that was really cool. He does really care about this girl. He's willing to defend her from his parents. He's gonna do, even when you think like, oh look, he's gonna side with her. Oh no, like he's doing all this stuff that's pretty much the right way, and also just dealing with how insane this actually gets.
Well, he feels very real. Like I could see myself doing a lot of these same things if I was in this somewhat unbelievable situation. It's and that's what makes this really a cut above like what most, even some of the stuff that Raimi has produced. I mean, this was put out through Ghost House, which is his horror movie imprint, and he's put out like a lot of crappy horror films.
Stuff. Yeah,
that are the exact sort of thing that we're complaining about. Whereas this has just that extra layer of care put into the characters, and it brings out something better in the actors. The guy that's playing the psychic that they go to, like he feels very textured and real, which in a lot of movies he'd just be kind of a one-note comedy character. And I mean, he is played a lot for laughs, but I mean, with that whole scene where him and the boyfriend are arguing about psychology and kind of theology through that argument, is a very smartly written bit of business, and it also makes them both seem like real people.
Yeah.
Well,
I agree. He does, and he tries to help her. In fact, he tries to help her through just enough to where he's like, man, I just really hope this goes away. So he gives her the book, which tells her to kill an animal. I still, like I was talking, we talked earlier, like being a cat person too, I really was like, oh man, don't kill the cat. But again, it's kind of the bucking the convention. Like it's the opposite of Save the Cat. The book Save the Cat. And also, although since part of me was like, why didn't you kill a chicken? You grew up on a farm, or a pig, which they actually show in the book. And she doesn't do any rituals.
I thought about that though. As a sacrifice, killing your own pet probably does make sense.
I understand, but like I'm just like, you were the pork queen, But like I said, another thing like just screamed about the horror movie rules, like you didn't even do a ritual. How did you expect that to work? And like,
well, I love it when they summon the demon though. He's like just straight up like, I don't want your cat.
Oh, and he barfs it up. Oh, so gross. But also so awesomely horror movie. Like this is the stuff that you want in a horror movie. You go and you want to gross out and you want all that. Like, it has all of that. And then, and that whole scene, when it finally, stuff hits the fan. But back up, there's all the other stuff where, you know, she goes, she's like, look, I don't want to be cursed anymore, and I want to make things right. And she's just shy of being able to help the woman who's dead. And that whole thing where the woman falls on her and just coughs up, again, back to the, like, you know, reenacts the scene where she's, like, gumming her and coughs up all kinds of embalming fluid. It's like, oh, just all of that just gets you right in the gut. Oh, so gross. And so,
you know, the whole use of gypsies here as a callback to you know, classic
Universal horror.
You know, this is honestly the first time, I will say this is honestly the first time watching a horror film, because I love Universal horror films. Anybody who has listened to this podcast for any length of time knows how much I love Universal horror films. You know, the scene at the gypsy funeral, you know, this was the very first time me watching a horror film with gypsies in it. And I would imagine 99% of movies that have gypsies in them are usually horror films. This is the first time, like, my 21st century liberal mind started kicking in. I was like, I wonder how gypsies feel that they're used in horror films so much. It's like, is this like a negative stereotype? Should I feel bad about this, or am I just being hypersensitive? And I talked about it with my wife right before I logged on for the podcast, and she thought I was being a little namby-pamby liberal about it. But I you know, what do you guys think about that? Should we start to move past this, or is this fair? Is this fair game?
I don't
It's
know.
fair game as in it's okay to explore it. I mean, it's a culture that is very much steeped in mysticism and mystery, and they're also they are a culture of people that have been, like, really, really, like, persecuted over the years because of misconceptions over their beliefs and also their cultural practices. I think it's okay. I don't think that any of this is negative. I think for something to be kind of written off as racist or unfair or unclean politically, I think it has to be really negative. And I don't really feel like there's anything very negative about the gypsies portrayed in this film. If anything, in a weird way, you can even look at the gypsy characters as being completely within the right, because, you know, I don't think of them as villains in this way. I see them as being the guardians of this really dark mysticism. And
well, again, like, is it racist the way the people are portrayed in Snatch? Like, that's a culture in that one. That's a culture of how, you know, these trailer people live. They're in the UK. And then if you go to, like, Rain and I went to Rome, and you encounter gypsies, and it's kind of like there's people you're like, hey, these people, you know, have this existence, and sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good, and then, you know, it's how they interact, and, you know, some of these people will try to steal from you or take advantage of you as a tourist, etc. Does that mean that all gypsies are like that? Like, of course not. Does it mean that you kind of want to go like, man, gypsies can suck sometimes? Yeah, if you're not part of that, like, and you get harassed, you know, you're going to think a certain way. I think, as opposed to, like, you know, having people actually try to take advantage of you or trying to take something from you. That
so the short answer is I am being a namby-pamby liberal.
Or, you know, the gypsies
I don't
here,
think
they
you're
have
being
their
namby-pamby
culture.
liberal. I think you're being sensitive, and I think you're being sensitive in the interest of equality, which is great. I commend you. But I do have to acknowledge that their culture is one that is very much steeped in superstition and mysticism, and these are topics that are that's the stuff of horror films, you know. These and a lot of the time, when gypsies are portrayed in horror films, and I'm speaking specifically of horror films, not action films or dramas or anything, but specifically horror films, they're always kind of depicted as being this noble creed that just kind of
particularly in the Universal, you know, we think of Maleva from the original Wolfman. You know, she's you know, you're rooting for her. She's gonna help Larry Talbot out.
Yeah, I don't think anybody, I mean, in the extreme, I mean, the woman does get extreme, but she's also a woman. That's why there's so many, this is more layered, I think, than people give it.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, it's very much layered.
There.
It's layered victimhood.
And it's a really big thing when she's shamed. Like, that's a huge thing in a lot of cultures. Not just gypsy culture, a lot of cultures. That shame in front of everyone in the bank is maddening. Plus it's because she's had this malady, and so it's even worse. She didn't ask for this malady that she has. Who knows whatever else happened, but she's shamed in front of that because of that. It's just worse and worse and worse. They're going to take her house, which is also something that's hers. It's being taken from her. All that stuff is, is it right that she cursed this girl? Oh, no, that's a terrible thing. Like, not only that, but she used the worst curse. It's not like she got mold or, she sent her something that's literally going to drag her into hell, and that's the curse,
See, I'm okay with that. I don't. That's like that's subjective. You see, because we've all been in that point where we've had our back against the wall. We're upset, and someone who could have helped this out decided not to for whatever reason, and we're just like, you know what, man? God damn you! We've all been like there. We've all, no matter what anybody says, you're a liar if you don't agree with this, but not you specifically, but just people in general. Everybody has wished something horrible on somebody who just screwed them over so badly. Like, I don't think the gypsies in this are actually the villains. I don't think I can look at them because, like I said, it's layers of victimhood. Like,
there really isn't an outright villain except for the demon.
Right. Well, even the guy who's going to take her job, right, who's a conniving jerk. I mean, that guy's such a slimy guy. When she confronts him and says, hey, I need you to take this button down, try to incurse him, and, and she even stops from doing that. But you can tell, he goes, you're not going to tell my dad. So here's this dude who's, old enough to not be so concerned, but because of his family circumstances.
Yeah.
And again, there's a lot of that. Now we're back to more family circumstances. Because of his family circumstances, the reason you realize the reason he's conniving is because he needs to make something of himself in the eyes of his parents, in his own situation. And, that you're like, whoa. I mean, he's still a jerk, but you kind of get just a little bit of a window into like, I guess, there's everybody has, it's pretty gray in the movie.
But even the demon isn't really a villain because the demon really doesn't have a will. I look at the demon as being kind of like this weird storm, or better yet, look at it like a gun. When it's just on the table and it's there, it's kind of like this sinister object. But someone picks it up and points it at somebody, it takes on a completely different connotation.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's really fascinating.
The demon, unlike a gun, the demon is sentient, and he seems to really like tormenting her.
Oh, well, it's
but
a
that's
demon.
The purpose.
But
that's
it's a
the
demon,
purpose.
right?
It's a demon. It's like, but what is the purpose of the gun? The purpose of the gun is to kill or harm or maim or really hurt somebody. And in a similar way, it's just kind of like this storm where someone kind of just like a dog. It's been sicked on somebody, and it's doing what it's intended to do. But, that's the whole purpose of, the story is they're trying to get this thing to be called off, which means that there is a potential way to get this called off, to break this curse. It's not like, it can't be broken. That's her entire motivation, is to somehow defang this curse or turn it off or pawn it off on someone else.
We haven't even really talked about the character from the opening sequence of the movie, and who shows up again at the later of the sort of psychic medium who fails to save the little boy, and they call her in. And what I love about this character and sort of the universe of this movie is, like, in a normal movie, you have this person's like, oh, I've been waiting to confront this evil, for decades, and now I'm going to get my chance. And in a normal movie, this character would heroically succeed in thwarting the evil force. But that doesn't happen here, which makes her death so much sadder. But it just makes the movie that much richer because you think about the mythology they're setting up. Yes, you can call off this demon, but it's really hard. Like, it's really hard. Almost nobody can do this. Normally, movies with, like, magic spells and things like that, they make all this stuff seem so much, like, just a little too easy for my taste. Like, the fact that, like, you could, like, oh, yeah, you can do it, but it's really hard. And
maybe it's just that she has to pass the book, which is, like, really horrible, but it's like, what would you do? Would you just, like, I don't know what I would do. Like, would I just tuck it in my pocket and be like, yeah, I'll deal with this so no one else has to? Or would I find somebody that I really think is a bastard and just try? It's weird. There's, like, this weird, like, component of just, like, you have to be necessarily evil to rid yourself of this thing, which is, you know, pretty extreme. You know, you also have to wonder, like, you kind of question, like, is her punishment, like, what she has sicked on her, is it really justifiable? That's another really. There are so many good questions about this movie. There's I could dedicate talking to this probably all day.
The whole, you know, it's funny. I'm part of a horror movie group on Facebook, and one of the questions they asked today was, if the last horror film that you watched was your life, how fucked would you be? And I was thinking about this. Out of all the horror films I've ever watched, this is the one I would want to be my life the least. Because this is such a terrible, terrible situation. Like even, like, you know, the Friday the 13th situations where, you know, facing Jason's like facing certain death. Jason is a human tank, and he is going to kill you. But at least then, you know, you're dead, and, you know, if there is an afterlife, you're maybe in a better place. Like, this is like you're either going to send somebody else to hell, and hell is literal. Like, there is a literal hell. You're going to go there, and there's going to be eternal torment. Or you're sending somebody else to that, which is a horrible, horrible thing to have to ponder.
And again, one of our guests on the chat room was saying, you know, well, they always wondered if you give away the button or whatever, like, would it damn her to hell later? You know, like, is she going to hell anyway because she's damned? She is the catalyst for damning somebody else to hell? Possibly. I would say that maybe she would, you know, die and wake up. Oh, crap. How did I know that? You know? The
fact that she didn't pass it off on to the jerkwad from her office, it kind of makes her a saint in some way.
Yeah. And that guy
trying to do the right thing.
Like, that guy, in terms of his virtue, is such a dirtbag. If anybody deserves suffering in the movie, it is that character, because he is conniving and he is treacherous. Also, I didn't know if you guys did any reading up on the trivia, but I read somewhere on a trivia page that Clay Dalton, her boyfriend, mentions that they have a private cabin in the woods, and apparently Raimi says this is supposed to be a direct reference to Evil Dead, which in a weird way,
I kept saying that. Like, every time he mentioned it, I was like, and she's like, oh, let's go up there. And I'm like, oh, awesome. Thanks, Raimi. You know, yeah.
So does this, then that lends us to the eternal nerd question. Does this take place in the same universe as Evil Dead?
Absolutely. It's got the card, doesn't it?
Raimi proposes that it does, because he says that the cabin that the Daltons own is the cabin in Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. That's according to Raimi. So,
well, then that's the voice of God.
Yeah,
pretty much.
In this universe, I just thought when he first mentioned that, she gets excited, and just the way that they present it, I was like, oh, man, that's pretty awesome.
Then Raimi, don't do the team-up with Mia from the Evil Dead remake and Ash. Do the team-up of Justin Long and Ash, and we can have Ash venture into hell to get his girlfriend back and kick demon ass. I'd much rather see that movie.
Or, you know, if she ends up, like, as one of the demons who comes back, you know, that's pretty chilling in itself, you know.
I also got to say
it's another girlfriend that's in hell.
Alison Lohman is amazing in this movie, by the way. I know that they were shooting for different actresses, but she's not really the most conventional actress in terms of the kind of actresses that you see in horror films or even films in general today. She's really good in this, and she apparently really laid it all on the line. She did all her own stunts, and she's really good. This is a great performance by someone whom I wish were more prominent. But yeah, she's great. Also,
where she has to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, where she has to go to the graveyard, digs up a woman. She goes. This is someone who goes to a graveyard, digs up a woman, curses at the woman, grave flooding, shoves what she thinks is the button into the mouth of this corpse, and revels in this. Like, screw you, you mess with my life so much, and she has. I mean, ruined pretty much most of the chances with impressing his family. Has she killed her cat. She's almost sent somebody to hell. So at that point, you're like, you know what? Whatever this woman, you don't really feel sorry for the gypsy woman any longer because she's enacted a terrible, terrible thing. And the music swells, and you're like, yeah, she got away. Whoa. Except you kind of know, like, something's going to happen. But then, she cleans up nicely, and they're going to go away. And then
to a cabin in the woods.
The ending. Yeah, to a cabin in the woods, no less. Which would have ended up terrible anyway, right? But
that's actually true.
And then she ends, he hands her the button, which is the way that plays out, where she falls and just literally gets drugged to hell. While and not only, this is another thing that's awesome, there's witnesses galore. Like, the people are running away from it. Other people are watching. He's watching in horror as she literally gets drugged,
and again,
straight into hell.
The pained look on Justin Long's face is so sad, and he's about to propose to her. This is the best acting this guy has ever. Like, I would totally want to see more of Justin Long than he's not normally this good. Like, he's been passable in some things, I will say, but he's really good in this. And again, that just sort of, oh my Lord, it's hard. That expression on his face alone is so heart-wrenching.
Well, it starts too with he's like, oh my gosh, my girlfriend is going to die, a train's going to hit her. And then it ends up being so much worse than a train hitting her. He's watching hell literally opens up in front of him and swallows her. And just as she kind of decomposes and, gets ripped apart, her face has all that, oh, man. So gross and so effective. And just and then it ends, just literally the name of the, movie. Drag Me to Hell. It happens. That, wow. It's not even one of those where oh, look, it was a dream and she gets drugged to hell or whatever. It's it all happens and then we're left, whoever's left at the train station to pick up the pieces. I thought that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's good. It's good all the way through. That's the most I can say. I was very pleased with this film, and I really went in thinking I was going to hate it. Yeah. I really went in with a negative perception.
And, it hits all the marks. I do really wish, because there's such great practical effects, for example, like the goat, which, starts talking and looking around when, they go to exorcise the demon can get passed from one thing to another. He's passed to the goat, and you're thinking, yes, finally they'll kill the goat. Maybe the goat will get away, something, and it starts to talk, and there's such great practical effects. It really is kind of a shame that some of the CG, because there's great practical blood, for example, when she has her nose bleed and it just shoots everywhere, especially in the unrated cut. It's just
again, for people who say that this movie pulls punches, and I admit it, okay, the theatrical cut of this is PG-13. That's light years away from even Army of Darkness, all right? But that scene with her nose is gross. It's
man,
gross. And it's
her boss not getting it in my mouth, where he's concerned about, he's going to get, could he catch something? Like,
and I'm a pretty hardened horror movie fan, and that whole scene makes me get a little queasy.
Good textural horror, man.
Oh, well, dude, the corpse, like Jason said, the corpse vomits formaldehyde into her mouth.
Ah.
For the second time that the woman gums her, and who's getting her teeth back in so she can bite her in the cart scene. So, like, yeah, it just sucks because, like, the one scene where, like, she gets her, the anvil hits the old lady and, like, her eyeballs and other stuff flies out and hits the girl in the face. That CG, not really all that good. It's weird because I wonder why, like, was it an editing thing? Why not go practical with that, considering we've seen eyeballs fly and everything in Evil Dead 2? There's all kinds of decisions you make, but I kind of wish a lot of the CG would have been done practical because it would have made it more cohesive, and it is kind of, it didn't really work all that great.
Well, stylistically, it just would have synced up a little better because, I mean, This is such an old-school horror film in so many ways, and, like, I understand, modern movies are going to have CG, but, like, we did Cabin in the Woods, what felt like a long, long time ago, and their philosophy in that was if we can make it practical, we'll make it practical. So, like, they have, like, a giant snake and a giant bat, and, of course, that stuff is CG, but, most of the monsters are guys in suits, and I think that sort of same rationale could have been applied here. But, at the end of the day, that's kind of just like a, woulda, shoulda thing. Like, I don't have, even with some of the effects, like, being a little dodgy at times, like, I don't have too many complaints about this movie because overall it's just so well done. Like the bad special effects, I kind of forget about them after they're done because I get lost in something else.
I just think that we can do weather, we can do a lot of stuff with CG. Blood and Viscera still, like, it just still kind of sucks, even 5 years out from this movie. And, I have friends who just refuse to see, like, they'll see one piece of CG that even looks decent and go, I'm not going to see that. And I'm like, man, well, that's fine because I'm going to be over here enjoying myself, so I'm going to go see that movie and love it. Or, hope I love it anyway. And I'm just like, I hate that mentality. Like, it just can't be good if it has CG. That's silly to me. But I do wish that...
I respect it. I understand. I mean, because, I don't know, CG has really wrought a terrible destruction on many industries within the film industry,
I agree.
So I can appreciate. I mean, like, here's a good example. Live and Let Die, the James Bond film.
Sure.
There's an incredible stunt in that movie where a car drives over this bridge that's kind of at this weird slant, and it does this tumble through midair and lands on the other side of the bridge, which is, again, also at a weird slant. And the artistry that went into the mathematical design of those ramps, the actual driver and the design of the car and everything that really had to go into that, there's a beauty and a humanity to it that CGI really just tramples. And when you're watching that, someone is just risking their life. It is a really incredible, beautiful piece of art. It is art.
I agree.
It's huger than anything like that Monet ever did, in my opinion. It is an amazing collaborative piece of art. And I can understand why people are bitter towards CGI, because it really deprives us of really great human accomplishment in film. Plus, it's just, in my opinion, really soulless. You can tell when somebody's touched something, like animation, even basic animation. When something is hand animated, it's just imbued with something that you can't get out of a computer. That's
I
not
agree.
just psychology.
And I do CG. I've said it before. I do CG. Like, part of what I do is CG for games, but I've done CG for low-end production and stuff like that. And I totally agree. I agree, especially with friends of mine who say, look, if I notice the CG, it hasn't done its job. And I will absolutely agree with that. Like, I totally, absolutely, and even Jason and I have had these discussions where I come out of a movie and I go, "Dadgummit, man, that part sucked," and he's like, "What? Like, what was wrong with that?" I'm like, "You didn't notice that CG? It just was terrible. Why did they do that? Why did they shoot that in CG? That's awful." And so I'm firmly kind of in the middle. Like, I think there's many good tools, but I think, like, saying that, you know, putting a limit on, like,
it's a good spice. I don't think it should ever be an entree. I think it's something that you can use to enhance. I don't think it's ever something that should be just like the main fucking thing on the plate. It should be garnish. If you have something that's practical and maybe a little brushing up could maybe make it look really good, I think it's something that should be used more sparingly. But now people are just like, there are people who go to see movies for CGI, and that's just so depressing.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. I mean, you know, they're used it for wire removal forever, and that works really well, you know?
Yeah.
There was a person on the Castle of Horror Facebook group today, though, that was saying that, you know, she had really snobby friends, and, you know, they won't watch modern horror films, and that even The Exorcist was too modern for them. Look, if you do develop that mentality, look, I love a lot of old things. Like, I love, you know, my favorite music tends to be music that was made decades before I was even born. I love black and white movies. Most of my favorite horror films are, you know, classic horror films. But if you have that mentality, for whatever reason, you are going to miss out on things. And I think in this case, you're definitely missing out. Like, if some of the computer effects are going to turn you off from watching this movie, because it is such a well done film.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it does bug me, like I said, and I'm trained to look for bad lighting and stuff like that because I have to. That's part of the craft that that I do. Is if I see it, oof, I better. If I see it, I'm the end user is going to see it. You know, whoever the client is or whoever is supposed to watch whatever it is. And so I notice that stuff, like, and I'm used to seeing it in tiny postage stamp windows because I don't have time to render it to full scale. And so a lot of times I'll see things that friends of mine are like, that didn't bother me. But I just think you're missing out. And, you know, I respect people who say, like, well, I've got enough old stuff to watch and that makes me happy. Like, again, it goes back to my mantra of, you know, like what you like. You know, I'm not saying those people are wrong, but it does kind of disappoint me because I want to go like, dude, this is good. There's good stuff out there. It's a shame that ruins it whole hog for some people.
I know what people that you're talking about too specifically, and I'm one of those guys who likes a lot of films that are considered to be low budget or cheesy. But to me, what makes a film great is the challenge of the film and how the people who made the film rose to accept that challenge. You know, there are a lot of films that don't necessarily 100% make you, you know, escape the scenario because they're, you know, the film was low budget. They didn't have enough money to do this, but by God, they did their best, you know. And really, to me, what's most important is ideas, concepts, you know.
Right.
I know a lot of films that I love that, you know, have really fundamental flaws, but still, the ideas are so good. And in this movie, the ideas are so good. And we know a lot of people who completely forgive films out there for their shortcomings. And if you can, a shortcoming is a shortcoming is a shortcoming. If the CGI is bad, then who cares? There are plenty of bad, unconvincing effects in a lot of other films. You just kind of have to move beyond it. I know that,
right.
But I know who you're talking about. You know, films are like people. You know,
sure.
No person is completely irredeemable or throwaway. You know, you just kind of have to look past the flaws and accept them for their finer points.
And I can't even, you know, again, like the only reason why I ever, you know, scoff or am mad at somebody who's like, I can't even watch that, is because, like, I'm like, man, not all of this is bad. Like, I want to share that enjoyment, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I can't fault them because, man, oh man, there's some bad CG. And again, going back to what, you know, like I said, blood and viscera still just look I don't know what we need to do to advance it,
Yeah.
Whatever we did to, like, water and weather effects that look pretty freaking good now, if they could figure out that with blood, is that, I still would prefer squibs and real blood because it just, gravity works a certain way, like, realism works a certain way. It has what you're talking about where it's touched by human hands. I don't ever want to see that replaced. When I'm advocating for CG, the thing is some people are going to use that. And so when they do use it because they've just decided, like, that's what I got to do, I just want it to be the better, I guess. Especially when this Raimi movie is so good, Like, those aspects, when I see them, I'm like, oh, man, but you had the cool practical stuff earlier. I wish you would have had that here, especially with the, like I said, the splatter onto the face. That looked, ooh, that was dodgy.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I feel you on that. But yeah, I think it's weird that people will ignore rampantly awful, obvious miniatures and consider that quaint, but they won't look at something if it has a bad CG effect,
Yeah.
Well, there are so.
It's funny how, like, bad CG ages so much worse than,
Oof.
I'll
totally agree there.
Like the good stuff stands up. Like I can watch Jurassic Park now, and Jurassic Park still looks better than a large portion of new movies. But if I go back and I watch like the Stephen Sommers Mummy, that movie was like $100 million movie, and it looks really hokey.
Oh, man, well, just, like I said, me working in video games, like I look at cut scenes where I was like, that was the best cut scene we can ever do. And
guys,
then I'll see it now, and I'm just like, oof.
I got a question for both of you. When was the last time either of you saw The Last Starfighter?
The Last Starfighter, it's been a while. It's been a while.
It had been a while for me, too. And that thing has some pretty rampant and fucking roguish computer effects.
That was the early cusp.
Yeah, man, that has some Sega CD graphics on the screen, and it hurts. It hurts, but still, there are so many good things about that movie. Performances, there are some great practical effects. The overall concept is great, and it is overall a very fun film. But, man, the computer graphics in that movie are just stunningly awful. And
they were trying. Even as a kid, and I love this is the what I just chose to go into, right? Computer graphics. Like, even as a kid, I thought it was neat, but I didn't think it looked as good as, say, the asteroid in Empire.
Yeah.
I knew the difference. Like, there's a big one. But they were trying. I mean, at the time, that was what they were trying. And I kind of give it up for that. But, yeah, you're right. It looks really shiny. I mean, they didn't have a chance to finish it, evidently. In some
kind of,
it looks, it doesn't hold up. And bad CG will date something, I think, worse than almost anything, or totally, yeah.
Returning this back to drag me to hell for a second, but this does correlate to the special effects. I am glad they never showed us like a full, like they chose to do like the demon in Shadow or the demon when it was possessing other beings. Like, and you kind of got a sense of what the whole thing would look like if you could see it, but you never saw it, and that made it so much scarier.
Well, dude, when the hooves come up in shadow outside of her door, and you see something walk, it's like, oh, it's a thing, and then from under the door, it's hooves. Oh,
yeah, that's a great idea.
Just freak you out, because if you saw that at your home, I mean, this shows it's something otherworldly, something terrifying. Like, it's not feet, it's not a ghost. When the clawed hands are reaching for her from these long shadows, that's some stuff that, like, even some Giallo movies didn't have that sense of dread, And I'd say a few movies since then have tried similar things, and it hasn't worked as well. But, man, that one's rough. That really is super spooky.
the occultism here feels genuine. And in some ways, actually, it feels better and more realistic than the stuff in Evil Dead, because the Evil Dead movies, it's more vague. Like, here's this evil book, and there are demon passages, and here's a chant. Like this, the curse stuff here has like a, I'm not going to say like I'm an expert demonologist or anything like that, but I've read my fair share of stuff on the occult for researching, for writing, and this has a legitimacy to it, even though it's still kind of Hollywood BS, but it feels legitimate, and so all that stuff has this extra layer to it. Also the fact that there's this familiarity to, the sort of default Satanism here is, I don't know, just all that stuff kind of like comes together and it works so nicely.
Well, a lot of it is the production design. The production design is great. This is very much a film, like I say this film is very nuanced. It's also just very rife with detail and textures. And like when they go into the occult shop, it feels very authentic. It goes out of its way not to date itself too. Nothing feels too current. This is a film that I know that there is obvious technology, but there's something about this movie that feels really timeless in terms of the texture, the colors, the way.
Well, the costuming too. I mean,
yeah.
The way they dress the actress. I forget the character's name at the moment, but the way they dress her, like she looked like she could be from the early '60s, or she could be somebody now.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just so much, there's a lot of good, and that's why it's a shame that, Drew, when you're talking about, like, I have friends who hate this, I'm just like, how could you hate, like, of all the horror movies, especially new horror movies, like in the last decade or so, like, why is this one that one that they dislike? Again, I think it's, what you're talking about with Raimi, but, I want more Evil Dead or whatever.
Well, people love the character. People, they want their icon, their hero to come back, but I think there's this deeper desire to see them fail for some reason. And Raimi to me did not fail with this. Like this is pretty close to a perfect game in some respects, and but people, because their expectation. Like I know people who like Diary of the Dead better than they like this movie, and like I'm a pretty staunch Romero fan. I'll defend some of his movies. Like I like Bruiser quite a bit, and I know people who hate that movie, and I totally get why people hate it. But like, this is like, to me, one of those things where you're going to really have to convince me why this is a bad movie. Like the only thing I can really think of is also that it doesn't have just buckets of Gru. But again, it's scary in different ways, and it's also like, okay, yeah, it's not like a nearly unrateable gore fest, but it's still pretty gross.
Well, even the difference between the unrated cut and people reacting to the fact it's PG-13, the unrated cut isn't even that much more gory. I mean, it's definitely gross, right? Like it's got more blood. The viscera on her face when that hits her, like, is actually rendered. There's bits that are not cutaways, but in general, it's the perception of, I bet the real thing was so much more, gross, or if only the studios had let him do that. And that's, again, I've ranted about that before too, where people have this idea that every studio or everything is out to get whatever creator. And so they'll, I'm going to boycott this because the studio didn't let this or that happen, even though they have no clue what the studios did or didn't do. And it's like, there's still people working who need that check. And so when you're penalizing the studio, a lot of times you're penalizing the people who, worked really hard. And that kind of sucks sometimes. And, the alternative is, we shouldn't have worked with them. Like, well, like I had a choice. you know.
Well, the idea of like what is and what isn't real horror is
right.
really shapeless, and like you ask 5 people, they're all going to tell you different things, and it's going to depending on like what they like and what they grew up with. Like I know people that consider anything made after 1965 to be terrible. You know, like I have baby boomer friends. They're just like, oh, I won't watch any horror films made past 1969, you know, because it's all garbage, and that's not a real horror film to me.
That's
and
retarded.
Yeah, and that's what I said. That's, you know,
that's as stupid as the people that I know who refuse to watch black and white films because they're black and white.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, people, you ask 5 different people what they think makes a good horror film, they're going to give you a different reason, a different explanation. But the bottom line is this movie scary? Is this movie scary? And this movie is scary. You know, I mean, if it didn't scare you, okay, I applaud you on your giant low-hanging balls. But, you know, like I've seen probably over 1,000 horror films in my lifetime, and I think this movie's pretty effective.
I think it has. I think it's one of those movies. Like I said, I find ideas rather than just frank imagery to be more haunting and more terrifying. Like taking scenarios and taking situations and running them through my head. I think that's why this film succeeds, because it had me thinking. Afterward, I was thinking, and that's why it works. It is a good piece of cerebral horror, and not even just for this period. I mean, I happen to think we're in a really low period for American horror, not horror in general, because I think there's a lot of great horror films being made all over the world. America's just doing the shittiest job of it right now. But this just not even for this time. Overall, I think this film is good for any period. You know, I think it's just a simply good horror film, not just for its time, but period.
Right. I think when people like reflect on Sam Raimi's career, which they are going to, he's made too many films that people either consider cult classic or straight up classic at this point. You know, he's made arguably, if you look at where the film industry is going, you know, the fact that he directed the first Spider-Man makes him a very important filmmaker. So people are going to reflect on his career. I think this is going to be a movie that people talk about, especially since he did come off of these big, giant, budget, epic, you know, tentpole movies, and did this sort of smaller, weirder, more cerebral movie. And, you know, like, I even like his Spider-Man movies, but this to me is a much, much, much better. This feels more complete. This feels more like his art. And, you know, like, if you can't see that in this, the vibe is there. The vibe is there. The atmosphere is there. And that's another thing. There are so many horror films out there that I think completely just fail to, you know, evoke any sort of atmosphere, any feel, any feeling. And this film definitely has a very pervasive mood to it. It is a very tense film. You know, it is a success on many, many levels. Well, the way they use color alone is great. Like we talked about, like the horrible sepia-toned horror films that have been so prevalent for the last 15 years now. Like, this movie makes wonderful use of color, and God bless it for that, because I just am so sick of movies that look like the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. Such a god-awful, bland, ugly movie. And, you know, this just even the choices of the costuming, you know, versus the...
Another great word you could use to describe this film is it has a very lavish feel. It is nice to look at. And when you're making a horror film, I think that it does you more to compel people to, like, want to look at the screen rather than push them away. There are too many ugly films out there, and this most certainly, no matter what anybody wants to say, is a very pretty-looking film. From the sets to the costuming to the color correction, it is a beautiful-looking film, and it makes you want to look at it, which is a great juxtaposition to the subject. That makes it very smart on another level. You know,
well, it reminds me a lot of the Hammer movies in that respect.
Yeah.
They had that very sumptuous look to them, but then somebody would get a stake rammed through their heart, and they'd have that really caked on batter-like fake blood, and it just looked so god awful with the contrast to everything else.
Well,
I kind of like that though.
I love it.
The house where they try to do the exorcism, the house where the gypsy funeral is, it's super bright. Well, they come from a very, it's so well orchestrated too. It's very dark, and you get this house that's pretty decrepit, and then she breaks into this funeral, which is in this culture a very lavish affair, and everything's bright red, and everybody's doing things, and everything's revealed to be super bright, and then when he does evoke kind of the downtone stuff, it's in the parking garage, in that scene. That's a very muted, but it's very muted scene, but it's used for full effect because those areas are very muted, and you get certain things with extreme violence in this very muted atmosphere. That then the next morning, when morning breaks, everything's hyper vibrant in a lot of ways.
Well, the certain things pop more when they're muted too. Like it's useful as a storytelling thing because you're supposed to know that car is the gypsy woman's car. Because it is so muted, that car stands out like a yellow crayon.
Right.
And it saves them from some of the crappy storytelling that they had to do in the Evil Dead remake because you do the math in your head, like, oh, the gypsy woman's here somewhere. And it's just that sort of visual storytelling is what sets Raimi apart from a lot of other directors who do these kind of movies because he's going to think that out, or at least or if it's not him, he brings people to the table who do think these things out. It's like I said,
there are a lot of people out there that make horror films because they know that the genre is somewhat reliable and they don't necessarily have any sort of respect for it as a legitimate genre. There are a lot of people who make horror films who have absolutely zero respect for horror films. They're easy films to make. The quality, the audience expects a limited quality nowadays. But I think Raimi is a guy who has a very pure and unadulterated love for horror. So sort of like guys like Carpenter or Romero, it's close to the vest for them, Meanwhile, you got guys like that douchebag that made the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. He doesn't care about Nightmare on Elm Street. He's a music video guy. It's a gig to him. He doesn't love the genre, and I think that it's like what you see, bereft of passion. He doesn't give a shit. He looks at the trends, and he knows that he's making a Nightmare on Elm Street film, and that's a job to him. And I don't feel like this is a job to Raimi. This isn't just a paycheck. This is he also wrote this pretty far before it was actually made, too, which I think is probably also something that you have to consider. He and Ivan wrote this immediately after Army of Darkness, and it just kind of stayed on the back burner. So there's something to be said for that too. But this very much feels like something he was passionate about.
Well, at one point, Edgar Wright was actually attached to direct this, and he eventually backed away because he didn't want to do a movie where he had to ape Sam Raimi. And I think that was a wise decision because now we get this more, again, this Sam Raimi that's been put through the Hollywood machine and is certainly more polished, going back to this crazier material that he started out his career with, and it's the results are fascinating to me. I just think this is a great movie. Like I said, I cannot, I have friends that just think it's terrible, and I find that really crazy to me. Like a lot of movies that I like I totally get it when people say, like, oh, I hate that movie. I'm like, yeah, last week I was the one person that kind of enjoys the Evil Dead remake, but I completely can rip it apart, and I totally understand why people don't like it. Like I'm a little bit more mystified that there are so many people that don't like it.
Gotcha. Well, on that note, we should probably give final last impressions and then close out our Raimi retrospective. Since we're past Evil Dead, I guess we can call it that. Jason will be back next week, back in the hosting chair, so that'll be cool. So I guess let's go Drew, Max, and then I'll give my last impressions, and then we'll do endorsements.
Well, I mean, I don't know what more I could add at this point. I just think this is a stellar movie. I think if you have been avoiding it because you're like, oh, PG-13 Sam Raimi horror film, I don't want to watch that. Give it a shot. Give it a shot. If you have seen it and you don't like it and you're listening to this podcast, please hop on the Facebook. Give me a very rational, detailed argument as to why you don't like it, because I would love to hear that. Me personally, I think that this is definitely one of the best horror films to come out in the last 10 years, and it's certainly one of the most interesting films in Sam Raimi's catalog. So I give it a big thumbs up.
Cool. Max?
It's a smart, nuanced, lavish-looking movie. It's got its own identity, and it is very much, in my opinion, what a director does when they mature, as opposed to like Raimi when he was just full throttle, in your face, balls out, crazy with the Evil Dead films. This feels like a more sophisticated and refined Raimi, and it's kind of like when you listen to a band that you love. You don't want them to just do the same goddamn song you love repeatedly. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there like that, but I, for one, am a guy that prefers to see my artists grow, and I really feel like Raimi shows a lot of growth. I think it's a return to form, but it's what an older, wiser, smarter, more refined Raimi would have done, and he did it. He succeeded. It's a good, fun film. It pays great homage to like EC Comics. It's got a great ending, and Allison's performance is phenomenal in it. The performances are good. There's really not too many soft spots, other than some of the effects being a little touching, just kind of touchy. It's a solid piece. I don't know why people don't like it, but I would almost assume that a lot of people who don't like it maybe just didn't even watch it. They just say they watched it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, for me, like, I think, rewatching it, especially and rewatching it unrated, like, I came to love it even more than I did the first time. And the first time I thought it was super scary. It was great. Just, saw it late night. Not many people there, but man, it was super effective. I think it's even scarier on a real horror level, where sometimes things that you do can have a greater effect than you ever thought they would. This could easily be done without the horror elements, in almost like a falling down type of scenario, where just things spiral out of control because of things you thought you'd done right. Like, you make these choices, the choices we make every day, and that turns into horror, I think, is effective. And you can go back, like Max said, Andrew, like, you can go back and rewatch this and go, oh, I didn't even notice this part or that part. I think it's definitely, I would love to see more of this from Raimi any day of the week, and I would put it up against, many, many movies that are not nearly remotely as effective that people have enjoyed as horror lately. I say, watch this again and again. It was, if you're looking for something scary, this has it in spades. So let's go with endorsements, starting Max, Drew, and then I'll go, and then we'll close it out.
I'm going to be a little selfish this week and promote something that's kind of close to my heart. My wife started painting last year after I set up a show for her. She's always been a really great sketch artist, and a lot of what she's done makes me laugh. A lot of it is very cultural mashup oriented. And so I booked her a gallery showing and said, well, I booked you a gallery showing. You have to have a certain number of pieces done by this date. And she did, and she has kept up with it. And she will be actually having she's starting to do conventions. She'll be at Texas Frightmare Weekend next year. But she has an Etsy, and she is at etsy.com/shop/Jolly Dream. And she does a lot of really weird stuff. Like she does family portraits of she's done the Bradley brothers from Basket Case in like an Owen Mills style. She's done Jason Voorhees as a little boy with his mom, Owen Mills style again. She's done a painting that actually sold for quite a bit, which features Sharon Tate, Roman Polanski, and their unborn kid, depicting what the son would have looked like if he had lived. But she also does like a lot of weird stuff. She just did a painting of Vincent Price dressed up like Weird Al Yankovic, and she's done a lot of stuff. Like she does a lot of Phantasm meets Three's Company stuff. So she's got a bunch of paintings with Mr. Furley dressed up like Tall Man. So she's done a lot of like weird, kind of funny stuff, and also stuff that I'm sure Tony you would really appreciate. Like she's done a Charles Bronson Totoro mashup.
Oh no, I love that one. I've seen like I wholeheartedly endorse this as well. Like I don't mind you being selfish because these paintings are truly pretty awesome.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it yet, and I endorse this.
Oh man,
yeah,
she also it's so good.
Yeah, and she also did Miyazaki painting Walt Disney as Pinocchio, which is really cool. Not Miyazaki, but Tezuka. Sorry. But she's done. Yeah, she's continuing to produce work. She's about to do Prince dressed up like Freddy Krueger, which I imagine is going to be great. But she's selling prints, and some of the originals are available. But you can purchase prints at her site. But she's a very diligent and dedicated artist, and she's kind of pursuing her dream right now. So I have to endorse that.
No, of course. We'll want to put that up on the Castle of Horror page as well, like to make sure people, because I've seen the Basket Case one was I think the first one I saw, and that was hilarious. And then as I've seen more and more, I just think they're really great mashups in a way that you haven't. I'm kind of tired myself of like everything has to be a Disney princess or a remaking of this and that. And I think these are much more clever than a lot of those fads that happen on the internet. That
my favorite paintings that she's done are the Basket Case Anne Frank mashups. She has a mashup of Belial looking out of the basket, and Anne Frank is next to Belial smiling. She's also done Belial like crawling out of a toilet with Anne Frank's face on it. And these are really striking pieces, and I hope that they never get bought. The original one got bought by one of the owners of Matador Records, which I missed that painting. But yeah, she's got lots of cool work, so you should check it out.
Definitely, Drew.
Yeah.
Well, almost a million miles away from that. It's not horror related per se, although I do know we got our fair share of comic book fans on here. Netflix just put up, they had a lot of the episodes up, and I actually endorsed them a while back, but they just put up the rest of them this last week. I dug back into Batman Brave and the Bold, which is it's a version of Batman that's sort of edging, not fully, but edging a lot closer towards the Adam West incarnation, and they have him teaming up with a lot of different obscure DC Comics characters every episode. It's a lot of fun. The animation is got this sort of Jack Kirby by way of the 90s Batman the Animated Series vibe to it. So it's really nice to look at, and it's just, I as somebody that tends to be able to go to dark places and everything like that, I always look at these shows like this particularly this one, the Avengers animated series from a couple of years ago. It must be just so much fun to write like these superhero characters in a more like all ages context, where the good guys are really good and the bad guys are really bad, and this is just a more likable version of Batman, because frankly, like, Batman as a character has gotten so overexposed that I start to get like annoyed by him, and then I see something like this and it's so charming and I'm like, oh, that is what I originally liked about this character when I was a kid. And just again, if you can watch it and sort of turn off your adult brain, you will I suggest you watch it while you're eating some sugary cereal, because I think that's the best way to do it. But if you can watch this and get in touch with your inner kid, I think you'll remember that superheroes can be really enjoyable when they're just being superheroes. Like, they don't have to be all these things that we as adult fans kind of ask of them a lot of the time. And I'm not knocking stuff like Dark Knight Returns or Watchmen or whatever. I think that stuff is great, but this is great too. And I think it's I personally would love to actually write like an all ages superhero thing at some point, because I find this so compelling.
Well, my first Paul has done just that with Spider-Man, and it's great stories. Great stories are great stories.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be joyless. When you grow up, it's funny that I know a lot of people who say, I still love comics. I still love monster movies. I still love name anything that is associated with not being an adult. And yet they'll also go, well, this has to be adult. And you're like, no, you're talking about like not growing up. Why does this have to be dark? Why can't
we want the stuff? It's like the trade-off. Like, you don't want to have to grow up, so you want the stuff that you like to grow up, so the people around you will accept you. But why does it have to be like this? It's like we're saying, just enjoy it, just like what you like. And I find this version of Batman to be very compelling. I wish he would show up in more things. I think we're years off for seeing this version of Batman in live action again, but I kind of like a version of Batman that enjoys being a superhero and enjoys, he's just a morally upright guy. I mean, we're as a culture, we're kind of at this point where we love, it's kind of going to that thing, we love seeing an icon torn down. But, being inspired to be better also has its value. So, just throwing that out there.
Got it. For me, I'm going to say, even though it's coming up, they announced the first wave of films for Fantastic Fest. And that looks like there's always some good horror in Fantastic Fest. I tend to actually go more for like the action, adventure, foreign films, and ridiculousness, which there's plenty of that as well. But there looks to be some really good horror coming through just in the first wave. And I think, so I'm going to say Fantastic Fest. If you haven't been, you should check out Trying to Go. And if you have been, you should probably re-up. Also this weekend, the American Genre Film Archive is showing 5 movies from some really great programmers at the Draft House for Cinemapocalypse. And that happens on Saturday, and I'm really, really psyched because some of my favorite people are programming for that. Again, sorry, those are in Austin, and I realize that we have a podcast, broadcast everywhere. But if you get a chance, also, one year you should actually come to Fantastic Fest, because it's full of awesome people. You get to meet a lot of people who are just there for film. And I, as an event, I think it's just really, really great. I've been lucky enough to go for the past few years, and that's been my, money spent on vacation has been spent on Fantastic Fest. So definitely check it out, and we'll post that link. And I think I posted a link earlier for a horror movie they announced, which looks really creepy. So,
yeah, it's kind of a boogeyman horror film, which I always find those to be kind of scary. Like, for some reason, that whole like concept to me, no matter how many times it's been done. I always find it to be a little chilling.
That one's good, and it's from Australia, so it'll have kind of a different feel to it. Yeah, I'm pretty psyched. So cool. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Thanks again, Max. Hopefully, we'll have you on
awesome.
for another another set. We're going to have the regular crew back next time, but definitely, and thanks to Adam for being with us before as well. It's been really, really great. I've had a lot of fun hosting, and I'm glad people have stuck with me doing this. So that's been really fun.
You've done a great job. I am happy to have the they've been, it's been 6 weeks since we've had the original crew on, and it'll be kind of cool to have the band back together. But you've done a great job. It's been cool having Max. I am very excited about next week though, because it's Jaws, and I've been trying to get us to do Jaws every summer since we first started doing this. So
awesome.
I love Jaws.
It is really good. So, and like I said, thanks again, Max. Thanks, Adam. I think he's listening. And thanks to Jason for turning this over to me. And thank all of you out in Radio Land for joining us yet again. We really appreciate it. And we had a really great turnout in the chat room today, too. So please spread the word and come chat. We try to answer as much as possible. So thanks a million. And we'll join you next week for Jaws. Take care, everybody.
Nice.
Now